Welcome to the Bookworm Duo, where we explore a variety of books. Today, we're going to explore a nonfiction bestseller. Let's get started.
Okay, sounds good. I'm ready. What are we diving into today?
Well, you sent us excerpts from Blood Money by Peter Schweizer, so we know you're interested in this one.
Yeah, I've heard some things, but haven't had a chance to read it yet.
It's a deep dive into China's influence on the U.S., and some of the claims in this book, well, they're pretty unsettling, to say the least.
Unsettling, how so? Give me the overview here. What's the gist?
Well, Schweitzer starts by taking us way back, like way back to the Opium Wars in the 19th century.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I vaguely remember that from history class. China was forced into opium addiction by, wasn't it the British?
Yeah, the British, dark chapter in history.
For sure. But how does that connect to China's influence on the US today? That seems like a big jump.
Well, that's how Schweitzer sets the stage. He uses this historical context to argue that China is now using fentanyl as a weapon against the U.S.
Whoa, okay, that's a bold claim right
It
there.
is. He's drawing a direct parallel, saying, China was a victim of drug warfare then, and now they're using similar tactics against their rivals.
Interesting. But if we're going chronologically through this book, I'm assuming he goes beyond just the historical context, right? What kind of evidence does he present to support this idea? Of fentanyl as a weapon, I mean.
Well, he dives deep into the fentanyl supply chain, and it's pretty eye-opening. He points out that China is involved in every step, literally every step, from producing the precursor chemicals to manufacturing the drug itself.
Wow.
And even, get this, even providing the pill presses used by the cartels.
So he's saying it's not just about China being the source of these chemicals, but that they're actively facilitating the production, the distribution, knowing it's ending up here in the U.S.
Exactly. And he doesn't just say that, he backs it up with evidence. Leaked documents, government reports, he even uses hacked emails to build his argument.
So he's really piecing together a case here. But why would China do this? What's their motive, according to Schweizer?
Well, he suggests that China sees the fentanyl crisis as a way to weaken the U.S. from within, crippling the workforce, overwhelming the healthcare system, fueling social unrest, you name it.
It's like, what's that term he uses? Unrestricted warfare.
Exactly. Unrestricted warfare, achieving geopolitical goals without traditional military action. It's a pretty chilling thought.
It is, but does he offer any solutions, or is it just a bleak picture of China winning this unrestricted war?
Well, he definitely calls for greater awareness of China's actions and a more assertive response from the U.S. He argues that we need to wake up to this new reality and take steps to protect ourselves.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Awareness is always that first step. But what steps, what concrete actions is he actually proposing?
He doesn't lay out a step-by-step plan, but he does advocate for things like stricter regulations on precursor chemicals, cracking down on money laundering, and holding Chinese officials accountable.
Okay, so a multi-pronged approach targeting different parts of the problem, I can see that. But I'm guessing Schweitzer doesn't stop there, right? The fentanyl crisis is just the first piece of the puzzle. What's next in this whole unrestricted warfare narrative?
This is where it gets really interesting. Schweitzer connects the fentanyl crisis to another, let's just say, hot-button issue: the financial ties between China and powerful figures here in the U.S.
Oh, okay, I'm starting to see where this is going.
He dives deep into the Biden family's business dealings in China, Hunter Biden's connections specifically.
Okay, so we're getting into some pretty controversial territory here.
Yeah, we are. This has been a topic of a lot of debate, a lot of scrutiny, but Schweitzer really goes there.
What does he say about it exactly?
He focuses on Hunter Biden's involvement with companies like BHR Partners. It's a private equity firm backed by the Bank of China.
I've heard that name before, BHR Partners.
And he also looks into Hunter Biden's dealings with Ye Jianming, a Chinese energy tycoon, alleged ties to the Chinese Communist Party, even organized crime. Oh, and then there's the diamond, the infamous diamond gift that Hunter received from Ye.
A diamond. Okay, now this is starting to sound like a spy thriller.
Right. But does Schweitzer directly accuse Joe Biden of any wrongdoing? Or is it more of a subtle kind of influence that he's suggesting? He doesn't explicitly accuse Joe Biden, no. But he definitely raises some eyebrows, let's say, about potential conflicts of interest and the possibility of influence peddling. He's basically saying that the lack of scrutiny from the media allows these kinds of relationships to flourish.
It's a complex issue for sure. I mean, just because Hunter Biden had business dealings in China doesn't automatically mean that his father's policies were influenced, but it definitely it raises questions, warrants further investigation for sure.
And that's exactly what Schweitzer is trying to do, spark that investigation. He's presenting a narrative that suggests China is using financial entanglement to gain leverage over American politicians, policymakers. It's all part of this unrestricted warfare strategy.
Right. Slow and steady erosion of American power and influence.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got fentanyl as a weapon and financial ties as a tool of influence. Pretty grim picture so far.
Yeah, not exactly light reading, but I'm sure there's more. Schweitzer's book doesn't end there, does it? What's the next thread he pulls on in this intricate web of Chinese influence?
This is where it gets even more interesting. He shifts his focus to something that, well, it impacted every single person in the world, the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is where his argument takes a very disturbing turn.
Okay, how so? What does the pandemic have to do with all of this?
He suggests that China deliberately downplayed the initial outbreak, allowed the virus to spread globally while they were simultaneously hoarding medical supplies.
Hold on, hold on. Is he saying that China intentionally unleashed the virus on the world? That's a pretty heavy accusation.
He doesn't go that far. He doesn't explicitly say that they intentionally released it, but he does argue that they saw it as an opportunity.
An opportunity? In what sense?
Think about it. The early days, all the confusion, the scramble for masks and PPE, he claims that China was intentionally deceptive about the severity of the outbreak while they were securing essential supplies for themselves.
That's a chilling thought, to think that a country would exploit a global health crisis for their own benefit. But what evidence does he present to support this claim?
He points to the suppression of information coming out of Wuhan, the silencing of whistleblowers, the delayed reporting to the World Health Organization.
Yeah, I remember all of that. It was very chaotic in those early days.
Exactly. And then he highlights how China quickly shifted from downplaying the virus to promoting their own authoritarian lockdown model as the only solution.
The lockdowns, that was certainly a controversial policy. Long-lasting consequences, for sure. So is Schweitzer suggesting that Western leaders were, like, manipulated into implementing lockdowns, or that they just made poor decisions based on the limited information available at the time?
He argues that it was a combination of both. He claims that China deliberately pushed this narrative about the effectiveness of their lockdown model while downplaying the economic and social costs. And he also criticizes figures like Neil Ferguson, whose modeling predicted those catastrophic death tolls.
Right, right. And that pushed a lot of countries to take those really drastic measures.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Imperial College model definitely had a huge impact on those policy decisions around the world. It's hard to know what would have happened if they hadn't predicted those numbers.
That's true. But Schweitzer's arguing that there was a deliberate effort to manipulate that information, to shape that narrative. And he points to people like Peter Daszak. He was really influential in shaping the WHO's investigation, and he downplayed that lab leak theory, you know?
Yeah, the origins of the virus are still a mystery, and there's been a lot of criticism about how the WHO handled that investigation. Didn't seem very transparent.
Exactly. And that's Schweitzer's point. He's saying that China exploited the pandemic to advance its own interests.
It's a pretty sobering thought, and it makes you wonder what can be done to counter these kinds of tactics.
That's the million-dollar question, right? Schweitzer argues that, well, awareness is the first step. You know, we need to understand the nature of this unrestricted war, as he calls it, and be willing to call out China's actions.
I see, I see. But what comes after awareness? What specific actions does he recommend taking?
He advocates for greater transparency from our own institutions, and for stronger regulations on technology companies, plus a more assertive foreign policy, one that really prioritizes national security and human rights.
Okay, so a pretty big shift in how we approach things.
It is. But he believes that, we have the tools, we have the resources, we just need the will to do it.
That's a pretty big if, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But Schweitzer believes that we can meet this challenge head on. We just need to understand the stakes of this unrestricted war. And that's what blood money is really all about.
Well, it sounds like blood money gives you a lot to think about. And I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface here. There's a lot more to unpack in this book, right?
Absolutely. This is just the beginning.
So we talked about fentanyl, we talked about financial ties, all pretty heavy stuff. But where does Schweitzer go from there? What else is there in this unrestricted warfare that he talks about?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Schweitzer argues that China isn't just targeting, the U.S. government or the economy. They're going after, the very fabric of American society.
Whoa, okay. How so?
He says they're trying to exploit and even make worse the social divisions that already exist in America.
That's a fascinating claim. A little disturbing, too. It's like that old saying, divide and conquer, right? Weaken a nation from within, turn people against each other. But what evidence does he use to support this idea that China is actually meddling in American social divisions?
He actually takes us back a few decades to illustrate this point. He talks about how China supported, believe it or not, radical groups like the Black Panther Party back in the day.
Wow, really? I did not know that.
Yeah, and now he argues that they're using, more sophisticated tools to sow discord and amplify those divisions.
You mean like social media? I can see how that could be a really powerful weapon for manipulating public opinion and stirring up, unrest.
Exactly. Schweitzer dives deep into the world of social media and claims that Chinese intelligence units are literally creating fake accounts to spread misinformation and inflame tensions.
What? Like, what kind of misinformation?
They're pushing all these narratives about, the decline of America, racial injustice, even the collapse of society as we know it.
That's pretty chilling. It makes you wonder how much of what you see online is even real.
Right, and that's exactly his point. He wants us to be more critical of the information that we're consuming online, recognize that we're all vulnerable to this. He cites, reports from cybersecurity firms, testimony from intelligence officials to back up his claims. He points to, specific examples of coordinated disinformation campaigns coming from China that spread like wildfire across social media.
It's kind of a scary thought how powerful these platforms have become and how easily they can be manipulated for bad reasons.
Absolutely. And Schweitzer argues that this is just one part of this broader strategy by China to undermine American society from within.
It's a disturbing thought. It makes you wonder, if this is really happening on such a big scale, what can we even do about it?
That's the question, right? Schweitzer doesn't offer any, easy solutions, but he does call for greater awareness, tougher regulations on social media companies, more efforts to, counter that disinformation.
It sounds like a really daunting challenge, but does Schweitzer explore any other areas where China's, sticking their fingers into American society?
He does. He turns his attention to kind of a surprising target, Hollywood.
Hollywood, really? I'm curious to hear how China fits into all of that.
Well, he argues that China is using its money, its financial muscle, to gain influence over Hollywood. And they're trying to shape the content of, American films.
So it's not just about making money, but about using that money to exert a different kind of control. But how are they doing that?
He points to, co-production deals, where Chinese companies invest in big-budget Hollywood films. But, and here's the catch, in exchange for creative control.
Oh, I see. So it's not like blatant propaganda, but a more subtle kind of shaping of the narrative.
Exactly.
Are there any specific examples of this, of movies where this Chinese influence is at play?
He talks about the movie The Great Wall. Remember that one? With Matt Damon.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Big action flip, lots of special effects.
Right. But Schweitzer argues that it also promotes the idea of China, subtly, as a benevolent protector, a force for good in the world.
Interesting. It's like a form of, soft power.
Exactly. And he claims that a lot of Hollywood execs are willing to go along with this because they're so eager to tap into the Chinese market. It's all about the money.
Yeah, the allure of box office profits, I guess.
Right. And they're prioritizing profits over artistic integrity, maybe even over national security concerns.
That's pretty harsh. Does he offer any evidence to back up that claim?
Oh, he names names. He talks about companies like Legendary Pictures, DreamWorks, executives like Jeffrey Katzenberg. He provides specific examples of how these studios have literally changed films just to appease Chinese censors.
It's complicated, right? On one hand, I get it. Businesses want to expand. They want to tap into new markets. But then there's the whole issue of artistic freedom, right?
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. He says China's influence in Hollywood goes beyond just the movies themselves. They're investing in American media companies, gaining a foothold in, the very structure of how we get our news and entertainment.
Wow. Okay, now that's a little concerning. It's one thing to, have a little influence on a few movies. It's another thing to have a stake in the companies that are producing and distributing that information to millions of people.
Exactly. And Schweitzer argues that this is all part of a deliberate strategy to, shape global narratives and advance their own interests.
So we've got unrestricted warfare playing out on the silver screen now.
That's what he's saying, in the boardrooms of media giants.
It's a pretty sobering thought, and it raises even more questions about, how we can protect ourselves as consumers from this kind of manipulation.
Exactly. We need to be aware, discerning, question the narratives we're being fed. And that leads to another platform Schweitzer explores in depth, TikTok.
Ah, TikTok, the app that everyone's using, especially, younger people. But is it as harmless as it seems? What's Schweitzer's take?
He calls it a Trojan horse.
A Trojan horse?
For Chinese influence.
I've heard those concerns before about TikTok, like the data privacy issues and the potential for censorship. But is there any evidence to suggest that it's being used for, actual Chinese influence?
Oh, he presents a ton of evidence. He dives deep into TikTok's ties to the Chinese government through its parent company, ByteDance.
Right, ByteDance.
He talks about how they collect vast amounts of user data. I mean, everything. Browsing history, location data, even biometric information like your face prints and voice prints.
Whoa, that's a lot of information.
Right, and if that data gets into the hands of the Chinese government, who knows what they could do with it?
Yeah, I mean, surveillance, targeted propaganda, it's kind of scary to think about.
And he argues that this is just the beginning. He gives examples of how TikTok has censored content that was critical of the Chinese government.
Like what?
like videos about the Tiananmen Square massacre, the Uyghur genocide, that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And he also points to the way the algorithm works, how it can be used to, promote pro-China content and suppress dissenting voices.
That's pretty alarming. It suggests that TikTok isn't just this neutral platform, for sharing funny videos.
Right. And Schweitzer argues that a lot of people in the West are pretty naive to the threat posed by TikTok.
Yeah, they just see it as a fun way to pass the time.
Exactly. But he sees it as, another weapon in China's unrestricted warfare arsenal.
It's definitely something to think about. We're all so connected to these platforms, it's easy to forget that they can be used for more than just entertainment.
Right. It's not just about having fun. They can be used to gather information about us, shape our perceptions, influence our behavior.
It's a pretty sobering thought.
It is. And this is just one aspect of what Schweitzer explores in Blood Money. He connects the dots between all these seemingly disparate issues. It's a much bigger picture of, as he puts it, unrestricted warfare.
It sounds like we've only just scratched the surface. There's a lot more to unpack here.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot more to this story. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Fentanyl, Hollywood, TikTok. It's a lot to take in. But Schweitzer doesn't stop there. He takes this whole idea of unrestricted warfare to a whole other level when he starts examining China's actions during the COVID-19 pandemic.
The pandemic. Yeah, that was a global crisis for sure. Impacted every single one of us. How does he tie that into China's strategy? This idea of undermining the US.
Well, he argues that China saw the pandemic not just as a crisis, but as an opportunity, a chance to, well, not only weaken the U.S., but also to kind of promote their own, authoritarian model on a global scale.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly is he claiming that China did?
Well, think back to the early days of the pandemic, right? All that confusion, all that fear. Schweitzer argues that China deliberately downplayed the severity of the outbreak, which allowed the virus to spread globally while they were busy hoarding those essential medical supplies.
That's a pretty serious accusation. Does he have any evidence to support that?
Oh, he does. He cites government documents, intelligence reports, even eyewitness accounts from Wuhan. He points to how Chinese officials silenced whistleblowers, suppressed data, misled the WHO about the true nature of the virus. It's a pattern of deception, manipulation that he believes had some pretty devastating consequences for the whole world.
It's a disturbing thought. But, there's been a lot of back and forth about the origins of the virus and how China handled that initial outbreak. So what's Schweitzer's take on the whole lockdown debate?
He's pretty critical of the lockdowns. He thinks they were ineffective, caused more harm than good. But his main point is that China intentionally promoted its lockdown model, the authoritarian one, as the only solution. And that ended up influencing Western nations to adopt similar measures.
That's interesting. The lockdowns were incredibly disruptive, and there's still so much debate about whether they were the right approach.
Right. And Schweitzer suggests that China saw those lockdowns as kind of a way to show off their model of governance as being superior, better than Western democracies. They were able to paint this picture of themselves as having successfully controlled the virus through their authoritarian methods, while the West was, well, struggling, right? Rising cases, economic fallout, you name it.
It's a compelling argument, but we have to remember there was a lot of fear back then, a lot of uncertainty. Leaders around the world were making these huge decisions, and they didn't have all the information. It was a rapidly evolving situation.
Absolutely. But Schweitzer argues that China intentionally exploited that fear. They used their propaganda machine to tout how effective their lockdowns were while downplaying all those economic and social costs. And he specifically points to figures like Neil Ferguson, whose modeling, remember, predicted those catastrophic death tolls. And that pushed a lot of countries to take those drastic measures.
Right, the Imperial College model. Yeah, that definitely had a huge impact on policy decisions. It's interesting how Schweitzer connects those predictions to China's manipulation of information.
He sees it all as part of this larger strategy of unrestricted warfare, right? Using information, using economics, even a global pandemic, to gain a strategic advantage. He's saying that China's playing the long game here, and they're willing to use any means necessary to achieve their goals.
It's a pretty bleak picture he's painting. But it's also a thought-provoking one. It makes you question the narratives you've been told, look at things from a different angle.
Exactly. And that's what Schweitzer's trying to do with this book, Blood Money. He's not just throwing out accusations. He's urging us to be more aware, more critical, more willing to question the information we're consuming.
So it's a call to action, a warning about the threats we face in this new world.
Absolutely. He argues that we need to understand the nature of this unrestricted war and be prepared to fight back.
Okay, so awareness is the first step. But what comes after that? What specific actions does he recommend?
He's a big advocate for more transparency from our institutions, stronger regulations on technology companies, a foreign policy that's much more assertive that prioritizes national security and, human rights. And he emphasizes the importance of individual action, too. Encouraging people to be more careful about the information they consume and support organizations that are actively pushing back against, Chinese influence.
Sounds like a big challenge, but an important one.
It is, but Schweitzer is optimistic. He believes that we have the tools and resources to overcome this challenge. We just need the will to do it.
Well, Blood Money definitely gives you a lot to think about. It's a dense book, it's complex, and we've just scratched the surface here. But it's clear that Schweitzer is raising some important questions about China, its influence, and, the challenges we face in this new era.
Exactly. Blood Money is a wake-up call. It forces us to see the world through a different lens, to recognize what's at stake in this, as he calls it, unrestricted war. It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish it, and it'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the world.
It's certainly been a fascinating deep dive. This book leaves you with a lot to think about, that's for sure.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe for more bookish adventures, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, and don't forget to share the knowledge. Spread the word. TETOI.